Did you know you might be killing your plant right when you're trying to help it? Yes, really. Every time you repot, there's a silent mistake most people make, and it slowly weakens even the strongest plants. It doesn't happen overnight, it's not obvious, but by the time you notice, it's already too late. Drooping leaves, stalled growth, and a plant that just won't thrive. And here's the worst part, it's not your fault. No one explains the details that actually matter. They tell you to change the pot, add new soil, but they don't tell you when to do it, how to handle the roots without damaging them, or which small mistakes can ruin the entire process. And that's where everything goes wrong. Because one careless move, the wrong soil, or bad timing can start a decline that's very hard to reverse. But here's the good news. Once you know these secrets, repotting stops being a risk and becomes the moment that makes your plant grow stronger than ever. Stay with me, because what you're about to learn could save all your plants. This is the guide that fills in those gaps. Whether you have been putting off repotting because it feels intimidating, or you have tried it before and ended up with a plant that looked worse afterward, everything you need to do it right is right here. No complicated botanical jargon, no expensive tools, and no prior experience required. Just clear, honest, practical steps that work for real people, with real plants in real apartments and homes. Let's start with the most important question that almost nobody asks before they begin. Does your plant actually need to be repotted right now? This sounds obvious, but you would be surprised how many people repot on a schedule rather than on need, and that alone causes unnecessary stress for the plant. Indoor plants do not follow a calendar. They follow their own growth rhythm, and that rhythm is shaped by the season, the light they receive, the temperature of your home, and the specific species you are growing. Repotting a plant that is perfectly comfortable in its current container is like waking someone up in the middle of deep sleep for no reason. It disrupts everything. The clearest sign that a plant genuinely needs a new home is roots growing out of the drainage holes at the bottom of the pot. When you see roots escaping downward or even curling around the outside of the container, the plant has used every inch of available space and is physically running out of room to grow. Another reliable indicator is when you water your plant and the water rushes straight through without being absorbed, almost as if the soil has become irrelevant. That happens because the root system has become so dense that soil barely exists anymore. The roots have taken over and water has nowhere to sit. You might also notice that your plant has started to look disproportionately large compared to its pot, almost top-heavy or unstable. Some plants will literally tip over because the weight of their leaves and stems exceeds what the small base can support. Others will show you they are struggling by producing smaller and smaller new leaves, by yellowing faster than usual, or by wilting even shortly after watering. All of these are the plant's way of communicating that something needs to change at the root level. Now, timing matters more than most people think. The best time to repot an indoor plant is at the beginning of its active growing season, which for most common houseplants falls in early spring. This is when the plant is waking up from its slower winter period, energy is building, new growth is pushing through, and the root system is ready to expand into fresh soil. Repotting during this window gives the plant the best possible chance to recover quickly and establish itself in its new container before the peak of summer growth. Repotting in winter is something you generally want to avoid unless there is a true emergency, like severe root rot that cannot wait. During the colder months, most houseplants slow down significantly. Their metabolism drops, their root activity decreases, and their ability to bounce back from any kind of disturbance is much lower than in spring or summer. A plant that would recover from repotting in 2 weeks during spring might struggle for 2 months if you do the same thing in December. There are exceptions, of course. Tropical plants that live in consistently warm, well-lit indoor environments may grow year-round and can handle repotting outside of spring without major issues. Fast-growing plants that are clearly suffering from being root-bound might need intervention regardless of the season. Use your judgment. Look at the specific signals your plant is sending and prioritize its well-being over any rigid rule. Choosing the right new pot is where a lot of beginners make mistakes that they do not even realize are mistakes until weeks later. The size of the new container is critical. Most guides will tell you to go one size up, and that advice is correct, but what it actually means in practical terms is choosing a pot that is roughly 2 inches wider in diameter than the current one. That might seem like a small jump, and it is, intentionally. Going too large is one of the most common repotting mistakes for beginners, and it causes a very specific problem. When you plant a small root system in a very large pot filled with fresh soil, that excess soil holds moisture for far longer than the roots can absorb. The roots cannot reach all that water, and the wet soil becomes a breeding ground for fungal problems and root rot. The plant ends up sitting in conditions that are perpetually too damp, even if you are watering correctly. By sizing up gradually, you ensure that the roots can explore and fill the new space at a natural pace, and that the soil dries out at a healthy rate between waterings. Drainage is non-negotiable. Any pot you use for an indoor plant must have at least one drainage hole at the bottom. Pots without drainage holes create a situation where excess water has nowhere to go, and it accumulates at the bottom of the container, where roots eventually sit in standing water and begin to rot. Decorative pots without holes can absolutely be used, but only as outer covers, with the plant remaining in a functional inner pot that allows proper drainage. Never plant directly into a container that cannot drain. The material of the pot also plays a role that is worth understanding. Terracotta pots are porous, meaning they allow air and moisture to move through the walls. This creates faster drying conditions, which is excellent for plants that prefer to dry out between waterings, like succulents, cacti, snake plants, and ZZ plants. Plastic and ceramic pots retain moisture longer, which suits plants that enjoy consistently moist soil, like ferns, peace lilies, and calatheas. Matching your pot material to your plant's watering preferences is a small detail that makes a meaningful difference over time. The soil you use is equally important, and this is another area where beginners often default to whatever generic potting mix is cheapest or most available, without considering whether it actually suits their plant. The truth is that soil is not universal. Different plants have very different preferences, and using the wrong mix can undermine everything else you do correctly. A standard indoor potting mix works well as a base for most common houseplants, including monsteras, pothos, philodendrons, and peace lilies. These plants want soil that holds some moisture but also drains well and does not become compacted. If you are working with succulents or cacti, you need a much grittier mix that drains very rapidly. You can buy cactus and succulent mix specifically formulated for this, or you can amend regular potting mix by adding perlite or coarse sand in a roughly 50-50 ratio. For plants that love humidity and consistently moist conditions, like ferns and orchids, you might want a mix that retains more moisture. Orchids specifically require a very open, bark-based mix that allows their roots to breathe and dry out partially between waterings. Using standard potting soil for orchids is one of the quickest ways to kill them, because the dense soil stays too wet and suffocates the roots. Perlite is worth having on hand, regardless of what plants you grow. It is the small white granules you often see in commercial potting mixes, and its purpose is to improve aeration and drainage. Adding a handful to almost any indoor potting mix improves it. Your roots will thank you for the extra oxygen and the faster drainage that perlite provides. Before you begin the actual process of repotting, there are a few preparation steps that make the whole experience smoother. Water your plant 1 to 2 days before you plan to repot it. Slightly moist soil holds together much better during the transition than bone-dry soil, which tends to crumble and fall away from the roots, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. At the same time, you do not want the soil to be soaking wet, as that makes the root ball heavy and difficult to work with. Gather everything you need before you start. Your new pot with drainage hole, fresh potting mix appropriate for your plant, a small trowel or scoop, and optionally a layer of pebbles or a piece of mesh to place over the drainage hole to prevent soil from falling through. Lay down newspaper or a plastic sheet if you want to keep your surface clean. Having everything within reach means you can move quickly and minimize the time the roots are exposed to air. Removing the plant from its current pot is a step that requires patience and gentleness, especially if the plant is severely root-bound. Turn the pot on its side and gently squeeze the sides if it is plastic, which helps loosen the root ball from the container walls. Then tip the pot and allow the plant to slide out, supporting the base of the stems with your other hand. If the plant resists, do not yank it by the stems. Instead, run a thin tool like a butter knife around the inner edge of the pot to release any soil that is sticking, then try again. Once the plant is out, take a moment to look at the roots. Healthy roots are white or light tan, firm to the touch, and clearly alive. Dark brown or black roots that feel mushy when you touch them are a sign of root rot, and these need to be addressed before you repot. Use clean scissors or pruning shears to cut away any rotten roots, cutting back to healthy tissue. This is important because leaving rotted roots in place allows the decay to spread and will continue to damage the plant even in fresh soil. Gently loosen the root ball with your fingers. You do not need to remove all the old soil, but breaking up the compacted mass slightly encourages the roots to spread outward into their new environment, rather than continuing to circle inward in the shape of the old container. If the roots are extremely tightly wound in circles, gently untangle the outer ones to point them outward. Place a small amount of fresh potting mix at the bottom of the new pot before you add the plant. The goal is to position your plant at roughly the same depth it was sitting at before. A common mistake is burying the plant too deep, which can cause stem rot, or leaving it sitting too high, which exposes the root ball and makes watering ineffective. The base of the stems or the crown of the plant should sit just below the rim of the pot, leaving enough space at the top for water to pool briefly without overflowing before it absorbs. Hold the plant centered in the pot and begin filling in fresh soil around the sides, pressing it down gently as you go to eliminate large air pockets. Air pockets in the soil can cause roots to dry out unevenly and create weak spots in the root system. Fill until the soil level reaches the same point on the plant's stem as it was before, then firm the surface down lightly with your hands. Water the plant thoroughly after repotting until water flows freely from the drainage hole. This initial watering serves two purposes. It helps the soil settle around the roots and eliminates remaining air gaps, and it gives the root system its first contact with the fresh, nutrient-rich soil. Allow the water to drain completely before placing the pot back in its saucer or decorative cover. The days immediately following repotting are critical and often misunderstood. Your plant may look slightly sad or droopy for a few days, and this is completely normal. The process of being removed from its container, having its roots disturbed, and being placed in new soil is genuinely stressful for a plant. Give it time. Place it in its usual spot with appropriate light. Resist the urge to fertilize immediately, since fresh potting mix already contains nutrients, and water only when the soil has partially dried out. Some leaf drop or temporary yellowing is not cause for panic in the week or two after repotting. What you are watching for are signs that something is genuinely wrong, like widespread wilting that does not improve, a foul smell coming from the soil which might indicate rot, or stems that become soft and collapse. If any of those things happen, investigate the roots again and address whatever issue you find. For most healthy plants repotted correctly, the recovery period is short. Within 2 to 3 weeks you should start to see new growth, and that new growth is your confirmation that the plant has accepted its new environment and is beginning to thrive. It is one of the most satisfying moments in indoor plant care, watching that first new leaf unfurl from a plant that you successfully moved through the repotting process. One final thing worth mentioning is that not every plant needs to be repotted into a larger container every time. Some plants, particularly those that have reached a size you are happy with, can be refreshed by removing them from their pot, trimming back some of the root mass, and placing them back in the same container with fresh soil. This process, sometimes called root pruning, maintains the plant at its current size while giving the root system a fresh start. It is particularly useful for large, established plants that you do not want to grow any bigger or that live in pots that are already at the maximum practical size for your space. Repotting an indoor plant without killing it is not about following a rigid formula. It is about understanding what your specific plant needs, reading the signals it gives you, and making thoughtful decisions at each step of the process. Once you have done it successfully a few times, it stops feeling intimidating and starts feeling like one of the most empowering things you can do as a plant owner. You are not just changing a pot. You are giving your plant the foundation it needs to grow, thrive, and stay beautiful in your home for years to come.